we're lucky that you're still around to be able to tell us about it.
I was just telling him tomorrow's my birthday. I'll be 82, and I have no. 20 years ago I'd said there's no way in hell I'll be here when I'm 80. So.
Thorne Brothers just celebrated its 40th year in business. And of course, the history here is important to us, but also the history of our sport. And it's long overdue. We're losing some of the early pioneers of our sport. And we thought it was time we honored some of those folks who made the sport what it is today. So we're introducing the inaugural class of the Thorne Brothers Hall of Fame. These three gentlemen meant a great deal to our shop and to us and to musky fishing in general, and it's our honor to be able to honor them. We're very lucky to still have one of the greats, Mr. Dick Pearson. He was able to talk about Jack and Tom and share some of those stories and just preserve a little snapshot of that history before we lose it all. So we're proud to announce the Hall of Fame at Thorne Brothers, our inaugural class in 2024. Come on in, check out the display. And now stay tuned. We have an hour-long conversation with Dick Pearson talking about these two gentlemen along with Luke Ronestrand, future Hall of Famer.
So we are very lucky to be here with Mr. Dick Pearson. And we are here because this year at Thorne Brothers, we are starting our Hall of Fame. And in our inaugural year, we're so thankful and happy that you agreed to do this and to be part of our Hall of Fame. And Dick Pearson and a couple of his friends, Tom Hansen and Jack Burns, are going to be our first three inductees. And I couldn't think of a better person to sit down and talk to about these gentlemen. You guys fished together, and we're very thankful and happy to be here. So we're just going to kind of start talking about these guys, and then gonna hopefully get some good stories about you and yourself and those guys, and we'll kind of go from here.
Sure. I don't want to come off as phony about this, but I don't feel that in my case it's deserved. On the other hand, it certainly is, I think, deserved in both of their cases. What we talked about earlier is I think it's interesting that your three picks turned out, in my opinion, to be largely loners. All of us, at least back in our formative years, were pretty much loners. But anyway, I'm honored to be considered in that company. So,
I definitely believe you're definitely. All three of you guys I believe, are all equals and are all very, very worthy of I guess I don't even know how to say that. I feel like we're blessed to have the three of you guys.
Well, I think all of us in our own way kind of, we've got some disturbance here, but all of us in our own way did things that really weren't the usual or the norm back then, but have turned out to be in large part at least correct to what we were doing and our approach to things and so on. So
you could say that that what you guys did laid the foundation for what we're doing now.
Yeah, people have told me that, and I think that you look around, I think that's, at least without trying to claim a lot of credit for things, I think that's true. I mean, open water and rocks and wind and current and exploration and trial and error. I mean, all three of us did things, in those respects, and that's really kind of what I think most people, that's the way they fish nowadays. So back then it was not. All of us at one point or another were ridiculed for not focusing just on weeds or trying to fish the wind or trying to discern and understand water movement in lakes and things like that. trust me. You know, and maybe part of the criticism and semi-verbal abuse we used to take was deserved, but you know, we marched a little bit to a little different drummer for the most part, all three of us. And I think, you know, maybe our personalities have something to do with that. The fact that you know, we often enjoyed fishing alone. Jack Burns once told me, well, yeah, well, I'll probably come back to this at some point. I don't know where we're going to go with this, but I remember a guy that was helping me with my video, and we wanted to do the finale on my book, and the only video I did. I wanted to just try to explain the experience of fishing on the Shield and of fishing alone and more nature, etc. And of course, that would have been right up Tommy's alley, and it was definitely right up Jack's alley. And so the finale for the video, we arranged to meet Jack on this same lake that we used to sneak around and hide from each other on. And we did our finale to my video with Jack, and we talked about it. But it was on that trip where he made the comment. He said, "I would something about, you know, you and I are soul fishermen, and not in a religious sense really, but in an appreciation of a little broader definition of what fishing is and what the fishing experience is." And he said, and I think you probably would agree with me, I would rather fish on a lake that didn't have muskies than fish on a lake that was crowded with musky fishermen. And he said, not because I don't like them, it's just that I enjoy the soul, the experience part of it more than the catching part. And you know, he was very sincere about that, and I believed him, and in a way, I think at the time I agreed with him. I said, yeah, you know, frankly, I would too. And some people don't have the opportunity to do that kind of fishing, or don't have the desire to do that kind of fishing. And on the other hand, both Jack and Tommy and I would agree that there's nothing wrong with having 20 boats on a weed bed, because I've done that in my day, and so on. But I think for all three of us, the exploration thing and a larger version of what fishing is was important. So anyway, great guys, both Tommy and Jack.
So I knew Tommy very well, and I knew Jack pretty well. I knew Jack well enough to call him a friend. Yep. I knew I met Jack back when my dad and I owned Musky Buster lures, and I would meet Jack for dinner, and I would give him some lures, and we would talk fishing. But I knew Jack, and I respected him enough that I never really prodded a lot. I never asked a lot of questions. But what I knew of Jack was he was a very hard working fisherman. He was a very proud guy.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favorite things about Jack was he was not afraid to tell you something if he did not like it.
Oh, for sure.
He you know, he was his little group, they were called the Musky Mavericks.
Yep.
They were definitely on the very front end of catch and release. And I do remember on their jackets it was DMDB, Dead Muskies Don't Breed.
Right.
And that was right across on their right across their chest and their jackets. And he wasn't a big fan of the you know, of people that were boisterous on the internet back in the day, and he was very much had his friends back, and was you know, part of the Esox angler movement, and just a really unique individual.
Yeah, he really was, and like me, when you are that way, you know, not everyone is excited to see you all the time, and but that probably bothered me more than it did Jack. And Jack, you know, for instance, on catch and release, if you weren't in favor of it, you probably weren't spending a lot of time around Jack.
Yep.
You know, I mean, because he was not very tolerant about that, and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. So
He was definitely one of our pioneers.
yeah,
in that.
Yeah, catch and release, and really pushing the message.
Well, not only that, but both yourself and Jack were some of you had such reverence for the fish that you caught that we went above and beyond with fish handling. I mean, I still to this day, I think the only musky pictures I've ever seen of Jack where he had a musky out of the water were the last few years he fished with the Shumways on Lake Vermilion.
Yep.
And I saw a couple photos of muskies with Jack with muskies out of the water, and otherwise it was, it had to be
leaning over if you saw him and the fish together, it was usually him over the boat looking at the camera and cradling the muskies, the front part of the muskie, the head and the belly maybe, and the net, if there was one, was usually in the background.
Yeah, it was just.
It's interesting how Jack and I did differ a little bit about the actual release. I believe then, and I still, to a large extent, except now that I've gotten real old, thought that you shouldn't use a net. The net was more harmful than not, and that's because I used to take unnecessary risks to release without the net. But we differed in that. He used the net quite a bit more than I did. But now, with age, I've come around to saying if I'm going to fish alone, I hurt him less using the net than I do struggling around over the side of the boat now and so on. So, yeah, Jack was a resource guy. Heaven help you, if a candy wrapper or something blew out of your boat, you went back and got it. You didn't keep going. So yeah, he was and you found out about it. You mentioned that he wasn't bashful about telling you what he thought was right, and bless him for that.
And then you guys were also very similar. He was also a lure tinkerer.
Yeah.
But
he really was. I treasure a two baits I've retired. I have them in my boat at all times, but I don't use them anymore. One was a double 10 he made, and for whatever reason, it was bronze blade, and it had if you looked at it out of the water, it had like a yellow tinsel tail color to it. I wish I'd brought it. I never thought of it. But when it was underwater, it was like a flashing green, and it was just, I'm not a big color guy that it makes a big difference, but there was something unique about that one. I caught a number of my biggest fish on that bucktail, and that's in since the double 10 era. And the other thing too was a relatively modern one. The other Jack modification, it was I call them the big banjo minnows. Musky Innovations. What's the plastic with the tail?
Oh, the invaders?
Yeah, the shallow invader. He had the first long wire harness for the rear hook, extended out to the end of the tail. He had the first one that I saw that really worked, and I still have it. And it was a fairly thick wire, extremely well made, and I tried to copy and duplicate it, and I'm a mechanical klutz. My wife, I'm sure she could have duplicated it, but it was not a simple design either, and it was heavy wire, and man, it just worked. The action of the bait was there, if not better. And so yeah, he was a tinkerer. I mean, he was meticulous about some of his baits, and I've had funny bait experiences with him. A mutual friend of ours, a guy named Don Schwartz, came up with a surface bait called the Rumber. That's long ago.
So we have one of those that's going to go in Jack's shadow box.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I almost bought a couple. I have some of the produce too. I'm glad to hear that. I can tell you the first time Jack saw this, because I think Doug Johnson probably had the first ones from Don, and I think I probably had the second ones. And Jack, when he was at his place in Morrison, if I was over there, what we would do is on morning one he would drive, but we always had to leave at 5, period. He didn't want to go any later, and that was fine with me, because I'm an early morning guy, good fishing or not. But we always would leave at 5, and one day he would drive, the next time we went I would drive, and you would pick your spots and so on. This one morning I was driving, and we pulled up to our first spot. I put on this rumbler. It was a perfect morning for it, calm. Sun was just probably starting to come up, if I recall. First stop, I get like a 40-incher, boom, just strike out from the boat. He's looking at me. He said, "That's an interesting high-pitched sound." I said, "Yeah." I said, "It's a mud puppy on steroids," is what I called it. We go to the next spot in one of his favorite areas of Lake of the Woods. It was in Miles Bay, and we pull up, and I think it was either the first or second cast I made to the reef with that rumbler, and I got a 50-incher. And I will never forget the the look after we water released it, of course, and he did his way of measuring it. He said, "Yeah, it's a 50. It's good enough." And I said, "Fine with me." And so now we released it, and he said, "I will have one of those next time you see me." And I know that. I think the same day he called Don up. He knew Don and called him up, and then he threw him for quite a few years. And I just started throwing him again. Great bait, but yeah, typical Jack experience. He was into the baits, and he like me. He felt that subtle little differences made a difference in terms of your catch rates and the size. And what was interesting to me, and I don't know if this was a universal experience, but the last few times that I fished with Jack, he threw 90% of the time he threw a Rad Dog spinnerbait, single Colorado blade, and he threw it the whole time I fished it in the last 2 mornings. And both of them are on Lake of the Woods, and that, of course, is a great bait there because you can do almost anything with it there easily. And we were always fishing relatively shallow. We weren't open water or deep water. But that struck me, and it stayed with me that I'm not sure why. I don't know if he was having problems with his wrists or his hands, or if there was something physical involved with it. I don't think so. I think that was just, he had decided that that's really all I need for this water and this time frame. So, yeah, interesting guy. A true brain, just like Tommy.
Oh yeah. One cool thing about Jack too is that he really took advantage of the custom rod shop at Thorne Brothers, because he had some really unique rods made. If I remember right, they were all close to 8 feet, but he ran just a short little rear grip, and he was a foregrip caster, and he put the rod right, and went right in his stomach, and it was a Garcia 7000 reel, and he fished fast. The only time I ever saw Jack fishing was on Lake of the Woods, and my wife and I were fishing just like a little complex of islands, and we'd been there for quite some time, and then Jack and his wife pulled up on an island across from us, and they started on a point, and they fished just the rock faces of this island. They didn't fish the little cups. They just hit the rock face, this point, and then gone, all in about 10 minutes. And he was just one of those, like at the forefront of the run and gun style of musky fishing that a lot of us use now. And
for sure. I sadly never got to fish with Tommy, so I can't really address his style of fishing per se, but I have a number of interesting stories about Tommy, and at some point in our discussion, I'd love to give him credit. The credit is due on what I would call the Laxon fishery and things.
Well, we can go to that. One thing I would say about Tommy, that I was lucky enough to spend some time in the boat with him, and then talk a lot of fishing, and then just have him be around. And he was an incredibly versatile angler. Yeah. He caught him on he caught fish on topwaters and bucktails and suics on the Shield.
Yeah.
And then he was also he had a jigs and creatures technique that he had. And then he also meticulously laid out his the structure that he was fishing. He had a lot of different marker buoys, and he would mark the channel edges, and he would just slowly, almost back troll these creature baits, and they caught just piles of big fish out of Wisconsin, even into the 2000s. And just like the numbers of 30-pound muskies that they caught, because he like yourself and Jack, he wasn't at that stage in his life. He just loved the muskies, and he would, for the most part, water released them.
Yep.
Didn't take a lot of photos.
Yep.
And but just he caught lots of them. Just because I lived with Paul Hartman for a few years, and Paul would fish with them, and just like the numbers of fish that they were getting out of those lakes. I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, it was it was in between 10 and 20 muskies a weekend doing this, and big ones.
He tried to get. In fact, I think he gave my wife and I a couple of those creatures, and if I'm thinking right. At least one of them had a jig head with a very fine, like maybe 8 inches of wire coming off it. And he was telling me what that did and didn't do to his presentation. And I didn't dare tell him that, Tommy, I'm too much of a type A run and gun guy. There is no way on the waters I'm fishing, Lake of the Woods, where I'm ever going to do the creature. Now, in fact, when I guided, when I retired and then guided a few years, I had a couple guys from Wisconsin that would come. All we did is throw surface baits, because they both made custom surface baits. And then I had another couple guys that all they would throw, though they were from Illinois, all they would throw was creatures. So I painstakingly learned. I was trying to hurry up. Let's move on. No, these weeds are good enough for us. We'll stay here with the creatures. And by God, they would just, I'd go over it. I wouldn't get anything with a bucktail, and they'd come back with that creature, and we got a surprising number of fish in Lake of the Woods. So I've often regretted not taking Tommy's advice about that and slowing down up there. I think the size of the fish might have been better. I don't know that, but it might have been.
The one thing before we go on to the Laxon story is Tommy Hansen. He would kill me for saying this, but he liked, I wouldn't even say he didn't want to bring any attention onto himself. Like, he was just a selfless guy. But he is the musky angler that most people don't know, that boated over 200 muskies over 50 inches in his fishing career that nobody's heard of, probably, except for his friends. And he would not that. He'd be mortified if he knew that I just said that. But he deserves the credit for that, because he was an incredible talent and just a great guy and hard work, and just another guy that just absolutely just loved muskies and musky fishing.
In all honesty, if a person was lucky to get to meet and to talk to every musky fisherman in the world, I doubt you would find a nicer guy in your entire world experience there than Tommy. more modest, quiet, everything that I should be. He's the opposite of, frankly. And Betsy and I, my wife adored him, and he adored my wife. They would sit and talk and talk and talk. She just thinks this is the greatest thing since peanut butter that you're doing this, and that Tommy's going to be part of it. So
that's awesome.
Well, let me just, before I forget, and senility grabs me here or something, I'll tell you the Laxon story. And I mean, honest to God, but for Tommy, well, it would eventually, of course, have happened, but it wouldn't have happened back in the late 70s, I'll tell you that. But, okay, to back up, after my wife and I moved and lived up on Leech Lake, it just killed us not to be able to fish muskies for months and months in Canada and in Minnesota at the time. And I'd go to Wisconsin early season, play around with jigs and dead minnows and all kinds of stuff and so on. But I said, you know what? I said, we're up here, and it's too early for good fishing, but I'm going to start a tournament, a fun tournament, and only ones that are going to be invited are old timers that we know. And so I did that. I think we called it we lived on Shingabee Bay of Leech Lake, and if memory serves, it was called the Shingabee Bay Musky Classic or something. And there was no admission, you didn't pay a thing. You got a hat, and you stayed either at my place or in sheds or in campers around my place, or stayed in Walker or whatever. But I would have all the old timers, and they would come Friday night. We would grill, usually venison or something, and drink some beers. And Saturday you would fish. You'd come in at noon to my place. We'd have lunch, and if you wanted to, you'd go back out. If they didn't, they didn't. And then we'd same thing Saturday night. And Sunday morning, if you wanted to get up early and fish, most didn't, because rarely did we catch many muskies, that's for sure. Then before we depart at noon, we'd have an award ceremony, just a bunch of crap. A lot of old timers were there, some from Wisconsin, but a lot of guys from northern Minnesota, Doc Cotton, Roger Halverson, Doug Johnson, and so on, and a big contingent from Minneapolis, and always Tommy. So at one of these, I had three. I think there were 3 classics. At one of those, we had a little cabin and a very small kitchen. And it just turns out a real coincidence. But anyway, during one of those on a Saturday night, my wife is out in the kitchen. I'm out to help her. And pretty soon, I know Jack Burns showed up. And Steve Fuller, then, who I fished with quite a bit back in those days, he lived in Bemidji, and he was there, and he was in the kitchen. So it would have been Jack, my wife, I, Steve Fuller, and then Tommy comes in. And he says, I'm amazed he said it around these people, but he knew and trusted all of them, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. He says, before I forget, he was talking to my wife, I want to tell you and Dick, I know you like to snoop and roam all over. I want to tell you a story. And he said, have you ever heard of Laxon? And I said, well, I piped up and said, yeah. It's this walleye hole up on some river system. And Fuller pipes up and he says, yeah, it's where Johnny Peterson and the Northland Tackle guys, they all go to fish walleyes. Tommy says, yeah, that's the place. He said, well, let me tell you, I'm up there and I'm snooping around with this little boat. He described, I don't know if it's the one you just showed me a picture of, probably. He says, I'm up there, and I'm in a place called Wapisi, near the mouth of Wapisi Bay, and I'm going down the shoreline. He says, and I'm casting. He says, I'm thinking I might get a big northern pike. And he says, the funniest thing, you go along, no follows, no nothing, and then bingo, all of a sudden you got a muskie. And I said, oh, come on, Tommy, that's too far north. They're not that far north. And he says, I'm just telling you. And he said, never any small one. He says, that was a good one, might be 48, might be bigger. And he just said, might be bigger. And the implication was clearly there were bigger ones there. And so I don't know what he ever caught there, other than he was the first one that I know that ever casted for muskies. At the time, the ministry told us there weren't any in there. You know, the MNR told us that there weren't any. So he had the unfortunate, if he was saving that for himself, which he wouldn't have done. I mean, he obviously was sharing it with us. But little did he know at the time that he was correct. My wife and I would go alone most of the time. But Jack had his friends, the Mavericks, and Fuller had his entire group from Bemidji, the Johnny and Dwayne Petersons and a whole Mike Christopher and a whole bunch of guys that have caught lots of big muskies. John Melhouse, and away we went. I mean, the rest is just kind of history. But it all comes back. None of those guys that I knew and that I'm talking about would have. Fuller and Peterson and those guys had been up there a number of occasions walleye fishing. Never thought of throwing for a muskie. You would have thought they would have caught a muskie on a walleye or something, but no. And here's Tommy chugging down there with a little boat down a shoreline in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where he was based out of. If he told me, I don't remember. Within 2 years, well, we had a few years to ourselves. And it was beyond belief, of course. And but Jack and his crew. I don't know Mark. I think it's Mark Christina.
That's the first time I've heard that name.
Yeah. Well, he was part of that group, and the biggest I know that Jack's group got, I think it was Mark Christina that got it, was 57 inches. I know Jack didn't get a 57 incher. I'm sure he got a 55. And Lord knows how many others. And Fuller, I think Fuller probably has still got the Muskies Inc. weight record, probably. Mm-hmm. He had a 50-pounder. And then I got some nice ones. And, you know, I mean, once the lid after a couple of years, full-blown publicity, and I can sadly remember the number of big fish. I can remember being called over, and I won't even name the state, by two guys in a boat, saying, take a look at this. And there was one they said was 56 inch, laying in the bottom of the boat. There was one they said was 56, and I have no reason to doubt it. And another one that for sure was 53, 54. And, that was not uncommon. And then, I'm going beyond Tommy and Jack now, but then, a bunch of us got to work and help the ministry come up with a draconian measure of shutting it down, basically. And it took, I still have little diaries the ministry gave us to keep records of what we caught and where and size and things like that. Bob Strand and an assistant of his, Norm Haukus, they came up and they got involved tagging, and it was a rush to get some scientific basis for the argument we have to shut this down, because obviously that was not unanimous. That was in favor of the resorts for the most part. Now it might be. It turned out to be a great thing for the resorts, I think. But anyway, that's it. That whole thing goes back to Tommy plugging away with God knows what, and he might not want to take credit for that, but he sure deserves credit for all the wonderful experiences a lot of people had up there and are still having. So I ramble a little bit there for you.
Oh, that's okay. We love it. But it's just like you said, you cannot ramble long enough about Tommy. He was just such a great person, and a great angler and a great ambassador for the sport. But now we get to talk about yourself, which I know you're very much like Tommy in that and since I've known you, you have never wanted to shine the spotlight on yourself or talk about anything, but you have had a tremendous amount of influence on our sport. And like we talked about earlier, it's just like a lot of the things that you were doing in the 70s and 80s, you know, or laid the foundation for what we're doing today. And also, like, your writing and what you wrote in some of those early In-Fisherman articles, and one that really stands out to me and that helped me a lot at a very young age was you wrote about how, you know, on these large shield lakes that we're starting to see some fishing pressure, about how the fish moved off of the main spots, the main points, and we're using the secondary structure around those points. And that I can tell you I've taken full advantage of that over my years of musky fishing. That's just one of the, you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg with
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to say about it. Lord knows if there's weeds, there's muskies. And I think the first time I ever fished, I was in school and in college in Madison, Wisconsin, and a friend took me up casting bucktails and heavy weeds up in some flowage in the central part of the state, if I recall. And then, you know, my first serious experiences were primarily weed related. But I can't remember exactly how I got a taste of what I would call trout water. And I think it's safe to say that I got to where I could catch fish with some regularity in weeds, be it Leech or Wisconsin or wherever. And then I hit trout water, and there weren't many weeds. If there were, I would find some fish, but you know, I knew the potential, and I think I probably got to Pipestone because I heard about a 46-pounder that was killed and was hanging in a liquor store in St. Cloud, the Mount. And anyway, so I ended up going there, and I fell in love with the lake. My wife fell in love with the lake, and I just said, well, you know, I'm going to figure this out. I'm just going to figure this out. In my opinion, discovered that at times wind has value and can help me get nice, bigger than average fish. Say it that way. So I started there, and you know, found out had some limited success there. But you know, what I started doing in trout water was really just a slow, stubborn, try this, try that, try this, try that. And it didn't take me long to know that it wasn't doing me a lot of good in what I'll call bad weather to do anything other than explore the water itself, the structures and so on. Because by and large, I was wasting my time. But so then, two things really allowed me to, quote, discover some of the things I think I discovered. Is one was my wife, because I always had to, if I had raised a 45-incher, and then I got what I thought was good weather, I'd want to go back and get the 45-incher, and she would never let me. No, now's when we got to go and fish new spots. So that was one key thing, and the other thing is I wasn't afraid to fish in any weather. You know, I would sleep in my boat, or I would do whatever it takes, and I just started putting these together, and then, you know, it might be something as simple as I was sheltering a storm in a neck, a narrow little neck to stay off the big water during the storm, and discovered, hey, look at what's happening here. They're all over, type thing. And so it was trial and error, and, you know, I wish I could say it was profound thought, and, you know, it really wasn't. It was just hard work and stubbornness. And then, I'm not sure if I should go here or not. But anyway, then I was on Pipestone one time, and this is an abbreviated version, my abbreviated Pearson version of what happened. And the resort owner says to me, Dick, he says, you're going to have company now this week, and the company turned out to be the In-Fisherman crew. And they were there to do a multi-species thing. And so they, you know, Al would do something, and Stangy would do something else, and so-and-so would do something else, and chasing different species. And they wrapped up, you know, the walleyes being the fishermen they are, they wrapped up the smallmouth, the walleyes, the lake trout. They wrapped everything up quick. But now they were trying to get muskies, and they were total blank, like blank, nothing, not seeing them. At least that's what I was told. And at some point, they were talking to the resort owner for ideas, and he said, "Have you seen that blue lund out there? A lone guy in a blue lund." Yeah, you've seen him, but he runs away every time we get near him, which is true. And anyway, abbreviate this again. Stangy and a guy named Tony Portencaso from Wisconsin tracked me down and asked if I would give them some suggestions and so on. And I think probably more to get rid of them, get them off the damn lake than to try to be helpful. I did. And they went in, and that was the killing days for a lot of people, and they ended up, if memory serves, killing a 36-pounder and a 32-pounder. They each caught one. Well, after that, Stangy, being a very good, persistent guy, I ended up being very good friends, and we hunted elk together, archery hunted, and so on. But anyway, at that point, I didn't know him at all, and he decided, hey, I'm going to get that Pearson guy and do a story about this now. And so I put him off, I don't know, a couple years. But he was very smart, and he made friends with my wife. And again, at that point, we were living on Leech, and I had a boathouse. And it was full of lures, and that's where my wife would go in and tinker with lures. And so he came up and said, I want your husband to tell us about trout water and write something on trout water. You know, I can't write it. His words were to the effect, I can't write another article about weeds. I just can't. And she said, well, I don't know. Anyway, he did the right thing. He pushed on my wife. And she finally comes to me and said, I think you should do something for Doug. I mean, you know, look at he's nice and da-da-da. So I wrote that article, and I think they published it. I think I wrote it in like maybe 80, 81. And they published it, I think, in 82 when I talked about necks and current and wind and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Touched a little bit on open water, maybe. I didn't do much of it, open water fishing back then. But anyway, that's how that went. And once the cat's out of the bag, I try to say no to more involvement, and I'm trying like hell now. But you know, you and Josh and some of these hoppies and so on. I mean, I feel obligated to them, and you know, if they really think I have something to offer, then I reluctantly agree to talk. But Stangy's the one that got me into this. Otherwise, I'd still be roaming around alone. I would have been another. Would never match Tommy, but I would have been that type of person. I would have chosen a different path. But once that article came out, there was a lot of ridicule because there were, I mean, 99.9% of people were fishing weeds, period. And so, you know, there was some downsides to it and some ridicule. People even on Lake of the Woods forget how you can hear on the water when people go by. And I never remember a very good friend of mine, well-known fisherman, and this buddy go by, and the comment was, "There's that effing dumbass Pearson fishing them rocks again." You know what? And that has haunted him for a long time because I bring it up with some regularity, believe me.
You should bring that up till the day he dies.
Yeah.
I do love that.
Yeah.
My only example of that would be like some open water fishing and out in the middle of the bay on Vermilion, and you would have guys drive by and they'd be like,
well, you hear them.
"Oh yeah, like look at those idiots. There's nothing out there. That guy's a guide, and his clients are paying him to do that."
Yeah, exactly. As they're roaring by. But anyway, once that cat was out of the bag, then next thing I know, Statland got me to talk at Chicago Musky Show, and away we went. And then I wrote the book. I have no regrets about that. Few regrets about the video, but anyway, then I wrote the book, and that's how I ended up here and interrupted you.
No, I was like, the mornings are great. I know that we've talked at length about yourself not being a Mooney, but I will say that it seems like the full moon mornings are the ones that are very good. I don't miss many of them.
I know. I won't admit this to. Now I have, I guess, or I'm about to Josh and just a ton of my friends. I know there's something to it, all right? Mm-hmm. I mean, when you have a ton of good fishermen saying this, and I still to this day, and you'll never convince me otherwise, that it's not largely self-fulfilling, because everyone that fishes muskies is on their best game at their best lure and their best spot on every major and minor. And I'm here to tell you that when I lie to my friends of when the major and minors are, and they fish that with that tenacity and that drive and that focus at the wrong times, things happen too. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big skeptic, but I do know there are things there.
Well, musky fishing, I think, is really unique in that and we can even talk about yourself and Jack and Tom, but like sometimes musky fishing is just finding something that works for you.
Yes.
And then just taking and just becoming really good at what works for you.
Yeah. And a part of that is like on Lake of the Woods, I always say somewhere on this lake, they're going. And somewhere on this lake, the way you are fishing will work. Now, the lake, the section you're on may not work for what you're doing, but I can tell you it's working for someone.
Yep.
Here, right now. I mean, and it really is. So that's exactly what you're saying, I think, and it is so true. Now there was the horrible weather days where, I mean, you're going to work to catch anything, period. But by and large, I mean, someone somewhere is catching fish, almost always.
And I've been meaning to bring this up. I thought about this a few minutes ago, but one of my other favorite things that you wrote that really has stuck with me is that it didn't seem like you were a huge lure guy, like magic lure. A lot of times with the different things that I've read, I mean, you've just basically said put on your best hooking, highest confidence musky lure, and just go.
Yeah.
And there's so much truth to that. Most of the time, that's going to be a bucktail, and bucktails are great big fish lures too.
Yep.
But how long did it take you to learn that?
Oh, I also, I mean, I do that, but while I'm throwing that same lure for hour upon hour, I'm struggling to avoid stepping into 30 more laying in my boat. And seriously, at least 200 somewhere in the boat. Mm-hmm. Lake Masters and Planos all over hell in every compartment. I think to answer your question, I think I went through stages where I mean, there was a period of time where I thought I could buy my way to success if I just had enough lures. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to say I was always that way, but I think in my case, it wasn't rational thought that brought me to that. At least initially, it was the realization that some lures just are more consistently better than others. Mm-hmm. And if I use those lures, I can catch them just about any time. If they're biting, I'm going to get them. Mm-hmm. So, people now again, suics are back in vogue. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time, 10, 15 years of my lifetime. When I started, they were in vogue. I mean, my first nice fish were on Leech Lake on suics, and then they were out of vogue. Where I mean, I never left them because I can do so much with them: weeds, rocks, whatever, shallow, deep, fast, slow. But I have a handful of things that. I probably throw less rubber than any modern fisherman, and it's not because I don't believe in it, or it's not because I don't want to have to buy another one if it gets torn, or it's just that I have such confidence in what I'm doing, and there are exceptions. There are the open water. The open water is an exception. I think by and large I would do on average much better if I threw more rubber than I do. Let me put it that way. But other than that, I am not afraid to square off against anyone. If I'm fishing relatively shallow, you have at it with your rubber if you want. I know what I'm doing, so I think I don't know if that answers it, but yeah, I mean, I do spend most of my time with a bucktail or a suic. Well, for sure, if I could have a spinnerbait tandem, a bucktail and a suic, I mean, there are times where I might miss a crankbait, tough weather usually, but other than that, even in tough weather, man, I got 3 really big ones for me nowadays. Last year on fairly tough weather on the suics again, and one advantage of no, it's not an advantage, but one result of me getting old and being feeble and unable to cast hard is it's forced me to slow down, and so now I can compete with my wife in slow meticulous fishing jerkbaits, and that, boy, that works. If I go relatively slow with a jerkbait, if there's fish around, I'm going to see them, I think, most of the time. So,
I mean, I'm not trying to toot your horn, but I know that you had a pretty exceptional year last year. From just a little bit of time I got to talk to you, and just kind of what I heard from some of our mutual friends, I think that's amazing. And then you also told me that you were doing some night fishing last year and fishing in the wee hours of the night, and I said I do not mean this in any condescending way, but to be 81 years old and to be out there in the middle of the night on Lake of the Woods, a long ways from your cabin, is like that's amazing.
I can't grow up and act my age. I mean, I don't know if I told you this, but even with snow on the ground, I've been out. I've got my left I call it my casting shoulder, is about shot. Fairly constant pain even right now as I'm sitting here. So I've devised a sidearm underhand type cast, which with the new nice 10-foot rods isn't working near as well. I'm gonna have to come up with a shorter one for when I take those. My plan would be every couple hours take an hour off and do the sidearm underhand cast, getting so you can. I'm pretty accurate with it now. I can't cast as far or not quite as accurate, but anyway, I'm persistent. I just can't seem to quit. And but yeah, I mean it's pretty nice. It's changing, and it's not going to get better.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping to go another 2-3 years, and I think I'm going to be surprised now that I've slowed down a little bit, because I caught 4 or 5 big fish last year. I'll define as over 50. 4 or 5 of those I would have never caught years ago, because I would have gone over them too fast, way too fast. And on one little rock finger, I caught 3 that averaged 52 inches last year, all on suics. And I'm pretty much sitting off there, and I don't trust myself and my boat skills and my balance to fight strong wind with an electric anymore. So moderate wind coming in, but wind that's been coming for at least a day, to where I think wind has made a difference. It has been helpful. So I mean, I've got a gloomy future, but I'm looking forward to the next couple of 3 years. I hope I can do it. Yeah, there's hope for us oldies out there yet. But.
Well, I will say that it's don't take this. It's inspirational to talk to you in that way, to be at 82 years old, to have that kind of fire and that kind of passion, because I think that's what it takes to be successful with musky fishing. And like for me, I find my, I don't know, like I have 3 kids, my wife has a great job, and so I still fish as hard as I can, because I don't know when it's gonna be my last season to be able to fish like this.
Go.
And it's just amazing to talk to somebody, and yourself, and Tom Hansen was the same. Tommy started to take a little bit easier, but he had a really bad back.
Yeah.
But just the passion for muskies.
Yeah, and it's not for everybody. I think a lot of part of it is opinions of old people, thinking they've got all the answers. But I think that musky fishing in general has gotten easier physically, both in terms of the basics, that is your baits, your tackle, terminal, and otherwise your rods. Everything has made it easier. The knowledge base is so advanced that it's made it a little bit easier. The fishery has grown. Admittedly in a bad spot right now, I think, for Minnesota, but compared to what it was when I started, we're in a good spot, believe it or not, with more stocking, more lakes, more whatever. So I think by and large, there's more people in it than would have been dealing with the equipment and conditions and the primitive nature of our even electronics, for God's sakes, and that's a buzzword I'll stay away from. But there aren't too many of us old people left, and I'm not saying that there aren't hardcore younger generations, because there are. I mean, you and your friends and some of the other young guys are fully as hardcore, if not more hardcore than we were. But there aren't, in any musky fisherman population, there aren't very many that will go hard. They'll go in cycles, and they'll go at prime time, but, and I guess a good argument could be made, they're smart enough not to go hard when it doesn't make any sense. But some of us just do anyway. I mean, even there are days where I get up in Lake of the Woods and, my shoulder's bad, my knee's bad, and I'm saying, God, I should sleep in. And then I'll look out and I'll say, oh, God, you're darn right, I should go back to bed. What am I doing? But I don't. I go. And, part of it's the soul thing, though, back to Jack and Tommy. I mean, some of us are out there for more than just touching a muskie. I mean, there's something about the mornings, and I used to jokingly at seminars tell people, did you fish yesterday? Yeah. How many bird species did you see? I'd ask them for examples. What was the wind direction? Did it change during the day? And by and large, lots of people don't notice that. They're just too focused on the mechanics, and not that that's bad. I mean, I'm not a good mechanical fisherman. We sure could talk about that. I mean, I should, because I know tons. I don't think I fish with anyone that's not a better technical fisherman than I am, but you guys that don't know how to fish, there's hope for you, because I'm not very good at it either.
I find that kind of hard to believe.
Well, you know what I'm saying. There are some guys that just, I mean, in terms of figure eighting and paying attention to what you're doing, and detail in terms of check your terminal tackle, I'm not beyond that, because you shouldn't get beyond that if you value the fishery, but I'm not obsessed by it. I'm not worried about it anymore. Don't get me wrong, if there's a big one caught in the boat, I'm happy if you catch it, but I'm a lot happier if I catch it. And that'll never change. that's probably not an admirable characteristic, but it's the truth. So,
One thing I should mention, just that because there's probably going to be a lot of people that watch this that aren't familiar with you, is that you did like most of your fishing is on the Canadian Shield, and you and your wife and a few others you guys you basically pioneered fishing up there, and then going back to the soul part of it. Like, I'll never forget the first time that we drove by Lake Sabaskong Bay and Nestor Falls, and looking out over that body of water, and just the feeling that you get is it's like none other in fishing. Just the whole,
it's a rush every morning when I get down at the dock. I mean, I used to just idle out and stop, and I was Jack same way.
mm-hmm.
It would be a rare morning other than, hi, how you doing, what's new, maybe a little bit of gossip, but then until we got to the first spot, we rarely talked. We would just go, because we were both getting the same vibes and just being there and kind of appreciating, how lucky we were. So, yeah, I miss those guys. It's the way it is. Like I say, I've got to squeak out another couple of years, I hope.
Oh, I think you got it in you.
We'll see. I have a guy I fish with, a Canadian friend who's very understanding and a very, very, very good fisherman, and I'm lucky in that respect, because he respects me and he respects my spots, and so yeah, it's been a good life. I hope I have been able to help some people.
Oh, you've done way more than that.
I hope.
You've been able to help a lot of people, inspire a lot of people, and just you've brought a lot to our sport. And I think this will be a great spot to end this part.
Okay.
But I have to just really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah. No, there's a handful of guys in the musky world, and you're at the top of that handful, that I've kind of called it a career, if you want. I guess it is a career, really, that I have followed from. I don't know. I remember you and your dad and Musky Buster. I remember all what I'll call all you guys. The only guy I think that in your group that I really didn't have any history with would have been Doug Wagner. But I remember Forrest walking down the path to my cabin in Lake of the Woods and saying, "You're going to take me out today?" And I always had some excuse. That was a dumb thing. dumb thing. I should have. Anyway.
Well, I think Hammernick still tells the story of the loudest topwater strike that he's ever heard was you and yourself and Dominic up in Wealthwood on the Lax.
Yeah.
That was a muskie that you caught. He said it was hands down the loudest topwater heat that he has ever.
There's some people that you get the opportunity to fish with, maybe just once, and you treasure it. And Jason was one of them. I'm thinking of Mille Lacs now, I guess. Greg Thomas, the only time I ever fished with Greg Thomas. One time he invited me up there when it was really hot, and going. So, yeah, I remember those times. Yeah, I caught one with Thomas, too. So.
Well, greatly appreciate your time.
Sure. Great. You filled up a load there.